Hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode about editing with Darktable. In this episode, I would like to address a few things about usage of color balance RGB module for split toning that I didn't mention in the last episode, and we will continue to respond to some requests. So, let's get started. This will be our first example, and as always, we will need to first make some corrections, lens correction, denoising, and in this case I think we can also improve or straighten the horizon. And I will also like to add some white format to this photo so that we have nice widescreen HD TV look. And now we need to deal a little bit with the brightness of the photo. What I would like to do to emphasize a little bit our model, so we need some kind of vignette to darken the background a little bit. And for that we will use next instance of exposure module. One mask. I think only this area is important. And now we can toggle the polarity of the mask and darken the background. And of course what we also need to do, maybe we can add a bit mask contrast and also feathering so that our mask fits a bit better into our environment. And now we have a bit more emphasis on our model. Maybe I could also darken this area with the grass. So let me do that real quick with another instance of exposure module. And just simple mask, it will need to be something special. Now the brightness of the background is a bit more even. Okay, and now for demonstration that I want to talk about color balance RGB, we need a black and white version of this photo. And we can do that black and white version with next instance of color calibration module. So let's do that real quick. So we need to go to the gray tab, and I will use the red channel for black and white transition. And I think we can also improve that a little bit by, in brightness tab, we can darken the blue a little bit, maybe also the green, and add even more brightness in the red channel so that we have a nice black and white version. Next step, what we also need to do, we need to calm down a little bit the local contrast of the surrounding. So we can use contrast equalizer for that. And just go down with those areas. Let me see. And we can use also blend mode, darken, so that we practically influencing only the upper half of the dynamic range, more or less. And now we can go to the color balance RGB and add some contrasts in the photo. Well, let me see. Maybe not too much darkening, but the difference between midtones and highlights should be a bit higher. And I think we could also use, let me try that, we can also use, I still have too much contrasts, local contrast in the surrounding. Let me use also diffuse and sharpen for add some diffusion. Radius, yeah, well, that looks a bit much better now. We need to calm down the background. So, okay, and The next thing that I could do is to go to the sigmoid module and increase a bit the white point so that we have much more contrast in the highlights. So let me see. Yeah, I think that's enough. And now we can talk about colorization of this photo with color balance RGB and some interesting things that I didn't mention in the last episode. If you want to colorize your black and white photo or give that photo some kind of hue, keep in mind how our perception works. So don't try to colorize the photo evenly, or we perceive the saturation in shadows and midtones much more than in the highlights, and you need to follow that rule. So to demonstrate that, I will now use next instance of color balance RGB for colorization and go to the Foveways tab, and you will see that immediately if I colorize just the shadow area, we already have impression of that colorization. Although, for example, the highlights and midtones are not touched with with this hue. And if you want to have something like a nice sepia tone, you need to add some brown tone to the shadows. And as you may see now, because we have that brown in the surrounding, the face of our woman or the highlights are looking more colder. So that's also one aspect of our perception. If we have cold colors or warm colors in the background, in the shadows and midtones, we will automatically perceive the highlights a bit more colder and opposite. And to compensate that, you can now add, if you want to have nice sepia tone, you can now add some color tone also in the highlights, but not the same as you have chosen for the shadows. For example, I would like to add just a touch of this kind of, it's almost yellow. So we have in the shadows, we have some kind of orange or brown. And in the highlights, we have some kind of yellow. As you may see, that looks quite nice. It's much better than if you want to colorize it evenly with one hue. So that is the first thing that I would like to show you. And there is another thing that is quite important. Now I would like to adjust the saturation according to our perception. And if I want to do that with linear chroma grading, you will notice nothing happens if I move some sliders here. For example, if I want to add a bit more saturation to the shadows, nothing happens. That means that linear chroma grading, this area here, those sliders, are not connected to the Foveways tab. So you can only regulate the original saturation of the photo if you have a color photo, but not in combination with Foveways tab, with adjustments that you have done in Foveways tab. You can do that with perceptual saturation grading. So perceptual saturation grading, you can make adjustments of original photo and in combination with those adjustments that you have done with Foveways tab. That is quite important thing to know. And it's also quite useful. I will show you in next example how that can be quite interesting. Okay, but let's improve our photo a bit more. So for that, I need to use, for that saturation improvements, I need to use perceptual saturation grading. So I would like to add a bit more saturation in the shadows and maybe just leave that kind of saturation in the highlights. We don't want to add or remove it. And we can, of course, also use the masks tab, go up and down, find a nice sweet spot. And I think in this case, we don't need to have hard transitions between those two areas. So I will also have a bit more flat transition between shadows and highlights. And of course, we can now also go a bit more. We can now also play a bit more with the contrast, maybe. Let me try that real quick. And we can also use these sliders here if I want. And now we have nice sepia tone. We can also colorize it differently. So let me try one more example of this colorization for this photo. Now we can make a duplicate of this photo, duplicate miniature, one duplicate, and go back to the color balance RGB and play a little bit with full waist tab, because contrasts and everything else is readjusted or adjusted accordingly. Now we can use, for example, for the shadows, we can use some other tone. Let's use some blue tone. And as you may see, in this case, this tone works also quite nicely with the tone that we have in shadows. So we have some kind of complementary color in shadows, excuse me, in the highlights. So we have now some nice complementary color in the shadows and in the highlights. And we can also play with this area here. I don't want to have that much saturation in the shadows. Let me see what happens. Okay, we can just add a bit more in the highlights because we have there a different tone, and we can also play with the masks and see where could we have nice. Yeah, I think this one is quite nice. A transition between those two areas. So this way you can use color balance RGB to colorize your own black and white photos. For example, if you want to adjust that color to particular design and make some series or whatever. So there is sepia, there is another tone. You can play with full waist tab and try to get some other looks, but that was, for me, it's enough for demonstration. Now we will use one more example. For that, what I'm talking about, linear chroma grading that is not connected to the full waist tab. So first thing first, as always, lens correction and denoising. And maybe I would like to improve a little bit the shadows. I would like to brighten a little bit the shadows. I can use tone equalizer for that, one preset. And now we can go to the color balance RGB and improve the contrast a bit, just a touch. I don't think we need to go too far with highlights. Let me see. And maybe we can use sigmoid and increase a touch the white point, just to be able to have a bit more contrast in the highlights. Okay, now our photo is prepared. Now we can talk about colorization with color balance RGB now. The idea behind the color adjustments that we need to do now is to separate our subject from the background a little bit. And as you may see, the background is quite colorful. So we have high saturation in the shadows and different hues also in the shadows. So everything is fighting our main subject. What we need to do is to desaturate just the shadows so that we don't have that much saturation. And also through the desaturation, we will have much more even colors in the background, which will not fight or which will not mix with the cold color that we want to apply on the shadows. So let me demonstrate that. We will add one more instance of the color balance HUB. And before we go into the four ways tab, we will go to the master tab and desaturated the shadows with linear chroma grading, so that we have count down all those differences in the colors in the shadows just by the saturation. And now I will like to increase a little bit the midtones, and as you can see, all those colors in the background, we still see the different hues, but they are not that much prominent. And now we can go back to the four ways tab, add some hue in the shadow for the shadows that I would like. Let me find some interesting hue, let's say something like that. And now we can go back to the master tab and increase the overall saturation of the shadows with perceptual saturation grading. Because with perceptual saturation grading, we are not increasing only the original color, but that's desaturated through the linear chroma grading, the saturated look plus four ways tab additional hue. So we have now better saturation in the shadows, but without that high differentiation in the hues, as you may see. Now, what I also can do, I can also go to the four ways tab and maybe also change the hue in the highlights a bit, just to have also that bluish tone in the highlights. I think it's a nice combination in the face, also gives us better separation. And we also need to do the same as for the shadows. So we need to remove just a touch of the original saturation in the highlights and maybe improve it with perceptual saturation grading. So practically combination between the original and the four ways tab readjustments, and maybe also just a touch in the midtones. And now we have the colder version. Let me add some snapshot so that we can compare that before and after the change. Come on. Now, as you can see, now we have the colder version of that photo, but it's much calmer in the shadows because we have desaturated the shadows with linear chroma grading before we have done our split toning. And I can now also make some color grading. For example, I can now use RGB primaries and say I would like to shift the blue tones toward the cyan, and maybe also the red hue of the red channel towards yellow. And now I have some kind of teal and orange look. And I think we have too much saturation in the shadow, so we can go back a little bit. Maybe increase it in the midtones. And of course, we can also play with the mask. I forgot to do that. So let me see, maybe here. And I think in this case, I will go a bit higher with the transition, or a bit steeper transition between those two areas. Let me see. Maybe the shadows not that much, but highlights. Okay. And as you can see, now I have a nice look where our model is a bit more separated from the background. Okay, let me demonstrate that once more with another example. We have here a nice desert scene, and let's see how can we improve the colors of that photo. So denoising, lens correction, okay, we don't have the lens in the database, it doesn't matter. And now I can immediately go to the color balance RGB and improve the contrasts and also add some saturation. let me see, so that we can recognize the colors a little bit better. And as you can see, we have two different areas in terms of the colors. We have the cold color area, that is the sky, and those paintings on the stones here. And we have another color, another a warmer color on the ground here, in the stones, in the shadows. But as you can see, for example, in the shadows, we have a bit more bluish here. It's not quite recognizable, but that's influence of the sky from above. And we want to make it a bit more orangey. Everything that we have here as a warmer color, we want to have a bit more orangey, so that we can have that nice contrast between that colder and warmer area. In this case, I will use two instances of color balance RGB, one for warm and one for cold colors. So let me add one more instance, and now we need to select our warmer colors. So from yellow to the magenta, maybe something like that. Let me see. Yeah, that's okay. So we need to improve also the feathering radius. Let's see, there, maybe just touch. We need to go touch back into, so that we don't use too much of the greens. Okay. And now we can improve those colors first. And as in example before, I would like to desaturate the shadows so that we don't have any other hues. A little bit with linear chroma grading, and now go to the photoways tab and add some kind of orange there. Let me see. Yeah. And of course, I would also like to add some more other hue in the highlights. So let me use some yellow orangey. Orange, something like that. And we can go now back to the master tab and increase the saturation in the shadows, and maybe in the midtones a little bit, but not in the highlights that much. And of course, we can also play with mask, with the gray fulcrum, with transition between those two areas, and maybe not that much steepness. Okay. And we will do now the same for the warmer colors. So we will use the next instance of color balance RGB just for the warmer colors, and we can use that raster mask that we have used for color balance for the warmer colors, and of course invert it. So we can choose color balance RGB1 and invert that mask, and we will have masked everything else. And now we can go to the four-ways tab, add some hue for the shadows. As you may see immediately how we improve the colors of the stones, and also some other hue for the highlights. Let's use that kind of cyany look. And as you may see, we have immediately improved the scene just with those two small adjustments. Now, maybe as last thing, I would like to add one more color balance RGB just to regulate overall saturation now. So I would say we don't need that much in the highlights, a bit more in the shadows and in the midtones, just a touch. And what we also can do, we could go to sigmoid and increase a bit of, white point, and maybe just a touch more contrast. And go back to sigmoid and maybe also increase target black. So And now we have nice separation between those warmer and colder area. And you see there's this nice combination between the colors of the sky with colors of those tones here. And also we have more evenly colorization of the warmer colors. Of course, so let me show you before and after. We have started here and here. As you can see now, we have nice separation between those two areas, as you may see. And of course, that's not realistic, but that will be the topic for the next request. So we are finished with split toning, and we can go to the request. The next request is also from Tony Barrett, and he wants to discuss about naturalistic versus expressionistic edits. And he refers to one of quite interesting threads in our pixels.us discussion forum called Style over Substance. And I will read: the work of these two photographers made me wonder, at what point does an image become more about processing than the shot? I thought some of Ogawa's images were really beautiful. Some of the vignetting is over the top in my view, but I can't imagine myself deviating so far from reality. Feels a bit tricksy. So let's see what kind of edits Tony Barrett is referring to. We are now in the online portfolio of Yasuhiro Ogawa, and what immediately stands out is this darker minimalist presentation of the site. Everything is reduced to a few headlines in this large white black field. And this seems to set the framework for the viewing experience, like the darkening in the movie theater before the movie starts, or silence before the concert. So let's see what we get if we go to the first headline. Here we are immediately confronted with a series of the snapshots, very, very heavily vignetted. I would say almost stroboscopic fragments of reality. And as it seems, vignetting is not used here to emphasize the motive, as is usually the case, but somehow to narrow the field of vision, as if we were looking through the peephole. So Ogawa seems to, to reduce our view so that we don't see the entire pictures, but rather a sequence of small impressions. And this is also reinforced by very strong contrast, like here, and different color modes. And the choice of motifs is also quite interesting. For the most part, these are seemingly small, subtle scenes that stand out through the play of light, shadows, and the colors. So, like some small details when you're on the journey that steal your attention. Okay, let's see what the introduction says. I will read now. Making this visual story was inspired by the 17th century Japanese poet Matsuo Basho, and in particular his work The Narrow Road to the Deep North. Ill on the journey, my dream takes off, runs around withered fields. Basho was a wandering poet. He loved to travel and wrote many of his haiku during his journeys. I'm also a person who has been obsessed with wanderlust and have admired his haiku since my youth. His work, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, has been a great influence on me, so I decided to make my photo story in homage to Basho's famous travelogue. Basho set off on his deep north journey in the middle of the 40s, and I began to shoot this series at the age of 46. With these photographs, I want to portray a middle-aged man's passion for life, traveling and solitude like Basho's artwork. And by the way, haiku, it's quite complicated topic, but roughly can be seen as type of poetry in a short, quite open form. And open means that the texts are not finished, but are completed in the reader's experience. So we have the fragments that open up emotionally through the concrete things described and the context. And if we take that into account, Ogawa's intention becomes much more clearer. We are practically on a spiritual journey with him, where he presents us with moments that stand apart from the typical sites, but document the journey itself. These small details that evoke some associations related to the emotional state of the given mindset of the traveler. And now, that being said, we can go back to the question, are Ogawa's photos over-edited? And to answer this question, we had to have a reference, and in my opinion, there isn't one, because photography, like all other art forms, is not representation of reality, but we see it quite well in this example, rather a language with which you present your own perception of reality to the outside world. And already with the choice of motive, its framing, lens, angle of observation and so on, you are in the process of formulating your own way of looking at things. And editing the photo is nothing more than a continuation of that process. It is practically the part of the same language. In this respect, I will say there cannot be over-edited photos. The question rather is, did the edit meet the intention? Have the author or the photographer mastered the stylistic means sufficiently to be able to adequately articulate his point of view? And in case of Ogawa, as we look at his photos, he's not even trying to be realistic at all. He offers us rather dreamlike fragments, I will say moments from the reality that he perceives as such. And for that purpose, he has mastered his craft well. And yes, taken out of the context, some interpretations can appear very intimidating and exaggerated. That's why not only the shot, but also the idea behind this is very important. So, let's dwell on the topic for a moment. Here we have a portrait from signatureedits.com. So, this is not my photo, and I don't know in which context it was taken, but the way this portrait was taken and the person pictured give me a few clues as to which direction to go with the interpretation. For example, this low-key lighting reminds me of the film noir genre in American cinema from after the World War II and in the 50s. So we can go in that direction first. So the idea is to give this portrait a black and white version, and we can start with lens correction and denoising, of course. And I don't think we need to do anything in terms of a correction of the brightness of the photo, but I would like to go to color calibration and see can I improve a little bit the white balance? So let's use this area here, or maybe even background. And now we have corrected white balance. And I will now use the next instance of colors calibration module to make the black and white version of this photo. And I will go to the gray tab, and we need to see what channels we can use. I would say all of 3 channels could be good for that black and white conversion. So we can leave it like that. And now we need to improve it in color balance RGB. So let's do that. We need to add a bit more contrast. Let me see, no, maybe in this direction with midtones. And of course I will also like to, excuse me, play a little bit with masks. So that we have this kind of transition. And, excuse me, maybe also go to the sigmoid module and widen a little bit the white point. So practically, maybe just a touch more brightness and not too much contrast. Let me see. So we don't need to brighten everything, because this kind of styles gives us that 3-dimensionality of the portrait. And I will say, so that is now, we have now a quite nice black and white portrait. We can also go back to the origins of this darker mood and see how it looks in Tenebroso painting style by Caravaggio from Baroque period. So for that, similar like in the first one, lens correction denoising, and I think we can also leave it there in terms of brightness. We don't want to have too bright photo. And of course we can also use white balancing here, and we already see a little bit that direction, but I will like to improve it even more. We can go a bit higher here with midtones and maybe also mid highlights, and of course adjust a little bit the masks or transition between those 2 areas. And of course also we can use sigmoid to improve or to widen the target white. And now to get that Tenebroso style, we need to do 2 things. We need to colorize a little bit that photo. So we can use next instance of color balance RGB and apply a little bit of red in the shadows, or orange, maybe something like that, and tiny bit of yellow in the highlights. But the second step, what we need to do is also to soften the photo. So we can use now contrast equalizer and soften the texture so that we have that nice painterly look. But this time I will use, I would like to apply it only on the upper half of the dynamic range. So I will use darken blend mode, and maybe even more, to give it even more diffusion with diffusion sharp module, excuse me. Let me try that so that we get even softer look. Yeah, maybe 2 iteration, but we can also use blend mode harmonic mean And this will give us even softer look. Now we can go back to the color balance RGB first one that we used for contrast and improve the contrast here. Maybe more darkening. Excuse me, not darkening, but shadows. Let me see. Let's go back a bit. And I think we need quite a lot of steepness to get that painterly Caravaggio look. And that will be the second interpretation of the same portrait. With the third one, we can try to break this low-key mood and go in completely different direction. So let's see what that might look like. First, we can make some corrections, and this time I would like to brighten the whole darker area, so I can use tone equalizer, my own preset. This is this one, and I think I will apply it twice just to have quite bright photo, something like that. And now we can play first with white balancing, of course. Let's use this one. And now we can make this portrait quite rough. So the first thing what I would like to do is to go with, as always, with some contrast. Let me see, something like that. But what we also like to do is to give this photo a little bit that old beaten look. So I can use the next instance of color calibration, go to the brightness tab and play a little bit with brightness of the channels. So for example, if you darken the red channel, you can see we see much more details in the skin, and the skin gets rougher, and also other areas. So let's go and find the sweet spot, something like that. And what you also can do, we can now use color balance RGB next instance and colorize just a bit the background. That was here, so that we have some kind, similar to the last example, some kind brownish background. And I think we don't need to do anything else here. Maybe give it a bit more that monochromatic look, something like that. Still we can recognize still the other colors, but they are muted now. And we can now use the next instance of color balance RGB and play again with colorization. But this time I think we can go somewhere here and maybe not that much, let's say. And we don't want to apply it everywhere, but just a few patches. Let's use just the mask, drone mask. Let's see, somewhere about there. Doesn't need to be perfect. Let's use it here. And maybe one on the other side. I don't know, let me see. So that we have some kind of look, as when we had some kind of black-white photo that is badly colorized. But we don't need to have that much saturation, so let me improve that. Let's go back here. We just need to have a bit indication. We can also use opacity. of that color mix in the background. Let me improve a bit this color here. I think we should go a bit more in the orange area so that we have that brownish background. And yeah, there is one more interpretation. And what we also can do, we can make it even harsher just by use diffuse and sharpen. And this time we can increase that local contrast, so I can use some of my extra contrast, my presets, but I don't want to that much, maybe the half of that. So let's reduce it with the opacity slider just a bit more. And I think we can also go back to this color and reduce saturation also there. We don't need to have too much saturation. So this kind of interpretation reminds me a little bit of Jan Saudek, a photographer, quite provocative photographer with his motives. But as you can see, we have now also completely different interpretation. So we have here 3 different versions of the same photo with 3 different moods. And actually the original photo didn't need that much editing. I think it will be enough to just improve the white balance and add some contrast, and that will be good. But sometimes you want to go a step further. You want maybe to tell some story. For example, in this last photo, we can perceive this woman as the person who has quite a rough life and still stands on her feet. And you want to emphasize maybe that unadorned state. And of course, it can be quite intimidating if you look at that photo without the context behind that. But in some kind of serious or embedded in some context, it can be quite a powerful kind of language that you present to the world. Okay. I think that's enough for this episode, and if you have some questions, please be free to ask in pixels.us discussion forum or, of course, in the comment section. And until the next time, bye-bye.